Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of my new video series. I'm Matthew Cooper with the Time and Space Photography, and in today's episode, we're going to be critiquing some of the photos that you guys submitted to me in the past couple weeks. We're also going to be doing an edit on one of those photos, and in the final part of the episode, we're going to show you some advanced tips and techniques in Photoshop. Let's go ahead and get started with the first critique now. Alright everyone, so I've got Jordan Lake here with me. He's a really good friend of mine and a really great photographer based in Wisconsin. He's going to be joining me on these episodes to do critiques of the photos you guys have submitted. And he's also going to be doing some edits in some future episodes, as well as sharing some advanced tips and techniques in a segment later at the end of this episode. So I just wanted to remind you guys that everything we're talking about on these photos, we're saying to try and help you guys take better photos. And we want you to really think about the photos before you press your shutter. That way you can get some really great photos in the future when you go to Disney. And then we'll show you how to edit those to be extra magical. So Jordan, did you have anything you wanted to add before we take a look at the first photo critique?
Yeah, I've watched a lot of photo critiques in the past, and I've had my photos critiqued. And of course, taking photos is artwork, so it's very personal. So have somebody to say something negative about your photo, you take it, you can't take it anything but personally. So I think I'd just like to say that I'm a pro amateur photographer. I'm not at the upper echelon of anything. I don't presume to be. I'm an enthusiast. I don't presume to have the final word. There's lots of ways of doing things. And I guess it's just my opinion, so don't take anything too personally. I don't have the best way, and I just would like to share the way I do things. And maybe for those of you who are watching, you can learn something. So don't take it too personally, but just try to have fun with it. And there's no one way to do something. And if you don't do it our way, you're doing it wrong. So, but we'll have some fun with it.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead and get into the first edit, which I'm going to pull up here now. All right, guys. So the first photo that we've got was submitted to us by Christina Ladinsky. Hope you guys will forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your names, but you can shoot me a message and let me know if I did so later. Anyway, so the first photo we've got here is a pretty straightforward shot of Expedition Everest in Animal Kingdom. And Jordan, what did you think about this photo?
Well, I think between you and I, we picked it because it has a lot of potential. It has a lot of visual interest right up front, being, it's got Expedition Everest right there. You know as well as anybody else, Matthew, that the first thing I look for is rotation. And so this one feels like the mountain is a little bit falling off to the left. So the first thing that I saw was the horizon needs to be tilted clockwise a few degrees. Of course, that leads to the next issue that would come up, which is it's either a pole or a tree that's off to the right.
Looks like a tree of some sort.
Yeah, it looks like perhaps they were framing it with that tree trying to be straight up, but I don't think that it actually is 100% straight up. So that would kind of be going off to one side. So I'd probably just remove it
Yeah, that was
entirely.
one of the first things we both said when we saw this photo is we wish that tree wasn't there because
Yeah,
it's kind of there. There's no real reason for it to be there. It's not used really to frame anything. It's just a big, tree off to the side cutting through the image for no reason.
yeah, and if it is a tree, the bark on it actually has like a metallic look to it. So it almost kind of for me, I thought it was a pole, and it kind of takes me out of the being at this mountain in nature, and there's this pole there. So I think you could actually add a lot to the photo by taking that out, and of course
Yeah.
the branches at the little branches at the top, the little details and things could be removed at the top.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
being Disney, it could be a fake tree, so that may be why it has
it,
the metallic
yeah,
look.
yeah. Um, The next thing I saw about it was the greens could be greener, and you could probably take out um, some of the yellow from the greens.
Yeah, that was
I
one of
can't.
the first things I noticed as well. It's a little tinted yellow, a little more yellow than I would like. And
Yeah,
as far as the color, also the blues in the sky, I really think those could be increased to get a real nice punch and contrast between the whites of the clouds and the blue of the sky.
yeah. The sky is amazing. I mean, the photos that we've looked through, some of the skies were blown out, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But this one, I mean, they've captured the sky, and you could really make the sky pop out quite a bit. I mean, that I think is one of the top features in this photo is the sky. Unfortunately, the light is hitting that foreground grass area, and so for me, it's creating. That's like where I'm looking. That's where my eye looks is that
Yeah,
really bright foreground, and it kind of makes the mountain because of the values are so drastic. It almost makes it look like it isn't a mountain. I mean, we all know that it's not a real mountain, but it almost lends itself to being something very small. You can tell it's not really as big as they want you to see it.
yeah.
So I think if you
The
could,
forced perspective doesn't come across as well in the photo. I agree with that.
yeah, I think if you could darken down the foreground a little bit and draw the user's eye or the viewer's eye up more towards the mountain, that would be.
Yeah, and that's something that if you guys don't know how to do, we'll be touching on how to do that in some of the edits. It's really easy to selectively increase the brightness on certain objects and bring down the brightness on others. So we'll be touching on that um, in probably just about all the edits we do. So look forward to that. And now let's go ahead and move on to our second image. All right, so our second image was sent in by Monica Bryant. It looks like a photo from the Canada Pavilion in the Epcot World Showcase. This is one of the photos that Jordan in particular really liked. So I'm going to let him talk about it a little bit first and go from there.
Yeah, I really love this photo because I think it has a lot of potential. I especially love the cottage. It really draws you into the photo. It makes you want to be there. It's kind of a fanciful or a fantasy type image, and the only issue that I have with it is right off the bat the colors are very desaturated because of the time of day that it was shot in. So, which a lot of photographers don't have control over. So, it's pushing the colors very desaturated, and then the shadows are very, very deep. And so I'm losing a lot of the detail that I want to see in that cottage. Um, at the same time, though, there's benefits to shadows, and there's benefits to that dynamic range. So we could probably dial down the exposure a bit and then pump up the exposure in the shadows so we can see what's going on closer to that cottage area, and then increase some of the vibrance in the flowers.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what time of day this was taken at, but we've definitely got some really harsh shadows that we probably want to lift up a little bit. If you're using Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, you can use that shadow slider to kind of lift those shadows up. I totally agree with Jordan. I'd love to see the focus brought a little bit more on the cottage, and right now it's just kind of hidden in shadow, while as everything else is just a little bit overexposed. So I think what you would want to do is definitely bring up the focus on the cottage by increasing the brightness, and then maybe dial everything else a little bit back, add some contrast. I'd love to see those colors and all the flowers pop because there's a lot of different color here um, that you could really use to create some great color contrast in the image.
Yep, and then the final thing for me would be just to get a little bit closer so we could crop out that railing and there's a gazebo or like a covered patio type thing on the left, which is distracting to me.
Yeah, I believe
So I
it's actually the Canada restaurant there, so that's probably like a waiting or seating area there for that restaurant. So
right.
we definitely don't need to see that in this image.
So I'd probably just pan over just a little bit to bring that out of the image, and that would put the cottage right on that left rule of thirds line, which would frame it up real nice. So
All right, let's go ahead and move on to our third image then. All right, so our third image here was sent in by Jerry Bourne. Got a really good picture of Cinderella Castle. I'm assuming this was taken at, yeah, it definitely was at sunset, not at sunrise, because the sun would be coming from the other direction. Um, this was one of the images that we thought was actually pretty close to finished already. It's got a really nice look to it straight out of camera, and I was actually pretty impressed. This was shot with just a little tiny Canon PowerShot point and shoot.
yeah, I guess that right what you just said there kind of proves that you don't necessarily have to have the best equipment. You just need to know how to use the equipment that you have, know its limitations, what you can shoot. But this photo is a great example of what you can do with the equipment that you might have just right now. You don't need to go out and buy a 40 grand Hasselblad to take good photos. The one thing that really distracted me in this photo was the white rocks right dead center. That's where my eye goes first. Nothing. I don't think it's a camera setting issue. I think it's just the rocks were just really white, which is just unfortunate. So that's just something you have to fix in post, because as soon as I look at the photo, that's what I look at are the white rocks, and everything else in the photo to me is gorgeous.
And it's to fix that rock is really easy. That's something else we'll show you guys how to do as we do some future edits. One of the things that stood out to me, and I remove this in every single one of my photos that has Cinderella Castle, is the Tinkerbell guide wire going across the top of the image there. That is a super easy fix. You can remove that. It's to me, it's really distracting. Someone who doesn't know what that is just wondering, what is this line that's going through the middle of the image? So you can use the heel brush in Photoshop to get rid of that. And if you don't know how to use that, we'll be showing you how to do that. I'm not sure if it'll be in this episode, but if not, it'll definitely be in a future episode. We'll show you guys how to use that tool to remove stuff like that.
Yeah, I think to finish off the photo to make it real pop, to really pop, I think I'd probably adjust the contrast just a hair. Nothing too much. We're in the shadow side of things, so sometimes I like to look at my photos in thumbnail view, and in thumbnail view you can really tell whether or not your photo has enough like visual contrast. If they look too dark in thumbnail view, usually it means that they are, and I think this one is just under the line. I think I'd pump up the exposure in the shadows just a little bit. It's a bit dark in the water on the left under the tree. So just like that white rock where you've got overexposed things draw your eye, underexposed, the black holes can also draw your eye too. And then maybe I would do a little bit of contrast between the values in the water and the values in the bushes on the right. They kind of blending together. And maybe an advanced move. If Matt, I know you shot this exact or something very similar.
I was actually shooting from over there where those light posts are in the image.
Okay, yeah, I know that you did an advanced maneuver to make that sunset pop, and I think that this photo lends nicely to that too. So there's
Yeah, that technique would work great with this photo to really make the sunset, stand out and really make it boom in your face.
Yeah, but I mean, for
If that's what you want to do.
right, but for a photo, pretty much. I mean, this looks right out of the camera, and maybe they edited a little bit, but this is really good. It's almost there.
Yep. I think this is just a great example of what good light can do for you.
Yeah,
So let's move on to our next photo. All right, and here is the last photo we're going to be critiquing, and subsequently this is actually going to be the photo that we're going to show you guys how to edit. This one was submitted to us by Carla Boutry. Hope I got that right.
buttery
Yeah, Buttery.
or buttery. I don't know.
Buttery. So yeah, Jordan and I both really like this photo. We thought there's a lot of potential in this shot. The first thing I noticed is it's just a little bit flat. So probably one of the first things I'm going to show you guys how to do is add some contrast to this image. There's some really great colors here. You've got the nice greens and reds and purple there with Ariel that you can really increase the color saturation to make that pop. Maybe even a little bit on the blues on the wood of the ship. Another thing I'm going to show you guys how to do, the sky is kind of blown out. So we're going to replace the sky so that you've got a nice blue sky. And probably do a couple other little things with that to make the sky stand out a little more. Jordan, what did you have to say about this image?
I agree. This one I think had the most potential from going to really flat to something that's gonna pop. A lot of the photos that were submitted were very, very close to just being, they were done. There's not much you could do with them. And of course, we aren't picking the ones that are the best, the cream of the crop. We're looking for photos that are framed nicely. This one's framed nicely. We're looking for photos that can go from 0 to 60 and have the most visual impact. Perhaps something that says, wow, I didn't know you could do that with this photo. And I think this one has the potential for that. There's a lot of there's not a lot of contrast in this photo. The values on the wood for the boat are very similar, and yet if you've ever been there, you'll know that there's a lot going on in there. There's a lot of depth there, and so you can bring that depth out and bring Ariel closer to you. So I think that the depth can be brought out, the contrast, the colors, and of course the sky. The sky is blown out, but we can fix that. So
Yeah, I'm not even sure if it is blown out, but I'm thinking it may have been an overcast day because the shadows look kind of soft. Everything looks really soft, which you're going to get, when you have those overcast days because the sky is just acting like a big softbox basically for the sun. So you don't get those harsh shadows and deep contrast in the lines. But
which is good. Which is good.
It's a great thing. Makes it what we can do with a flat image is a lot easier to, in my opinion, to fix a flat image than something that has extreme contrast.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so I'm going to take this photo here into Photoshop here in just a few minutes, and I'm going to show you how to take this image from, as Jordan puts it, from 0 to 60. And we're going to take it every step of the way from, open it up in, was this a raw image? No, it's a JPEG. But we'll basically show you, probably start off in Lightroom, do some adjustments there, and then bring it into Photoshop and do some finishing touches to really make it stand out. Alright everyone, so let's just go ahead and jump right in with our first edit. As I mentioned before, kind of the first thing that stands out to me is this overblown white looking sky. So we're going to start by replacing that. So let's go ahead and create a new layer by hitting Control Shift N. And that's going to bring up this dialog here, and we can just click OK to create our new blank layer. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a gradient in the area here to basically fill in kind of a sky color. I've actually pre-selected my two colors. So for my main color, I chose 0B5EAF, and that's going to be kind of our darker blue for the sky. And then for our lighter blue, I chose 6FD2FA. You'll see we've got kind of the darker blue and then the lighter blue. So on our blank layer, we're going to pull up our gradient tool here, and holding the shift key, we're going to click at the top and drag down so that we create a gradient on our to use for our sky here. Now, as you'll see, it completely fills up the screen, which is not what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that layer for now. And we're going to go back and click on our background layer, and we're going to create a selection of just the sky so that we can apply it to the gradient that we just created. Alright, so my favorite way to probably make selections like this, especially since we have a complex selection with the palm trees here, is by going into Select and Color Range. And you want to make sure that the option Sampled Colors is selected. And then for the selection preview, I usually will toggle back and forth between None and Grayscale. And you'll see if you have None selected, you only get the preview here in this little window. And if you click on Grayscale, then it actually shows you in the bigger window behind you kind of what you're going to get as your selection. So the selection is going to be everything that's in white. So I'm just going to click up here in the sky, and you'll see instantly we've got a really nice kind of selection of our sky, and it does a really good job of selecting around the detail in the trees here. We've got a couple problems here, but we can fix that in a second. So let's just go ahead and hit OK to create our selection. And then we're going to come back up here and unhide our original gradient, and we're going to click down here on Add a Layer Mask. And what that does is that basically takes our selection and makes it so only where our selection was is this gradient visible in the image below. Now, like I said, we had a couple problem areas, so I'm just going to Alt click, and if you're on a Mac, that's going to be I believe the Option key. And we'll just Alt click here, and all this area that's not sky, we want to go ahead and just fill that in with black so that it hides it from our mask. And I'm just going to do this real quickly here, but if you're working on this for something a little bit more important, then you might want to take a little bit more time just to make sure everything is just right. And it looks like we got a little bit of area up here on Ariel's hand. So let's just fill that in. Alright, zoom out, take a look. And that looks pretty good. So we'll just click back, and you'll see now that that gradient is only really showing up in the area that we want in the sky. Oh, actually, I've got a little area right over here. Let's fix that as well. Click on our mask and just paint it black to make it go away. And if you make a mistake like I did, you can just invert your colors and paint back in white. Alright, that looks pretty good. You'll see that there's a little bit of problems around the palm trees, but we're going to fix that here in just a second. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually add some clouds into the sky, because like this it just looks fake and it's not very interesting. So what I did is I actually downloaded some free cloud brushes off the internet, and I'll include a link to those somewhere in the video or in the comments, so look for those. But let's just go and we'll select from our brush tool. Using our brush tool, we'll select one of these cloud brushes here, and let's take a look and see what these look like. So before we stamp our cloud, we want to create another blank layer so that we can put our clouds on their own layer. And then so that we're only applying it within the sky, we'll want to control click on our mask, and that'll create a selection so that when we stamp this cloud, it only shows up in the sky. And I'm going to put one over here kind of behind this tree, and you'll see that kind of helps to hide the issue we had with the mask. And let's actually pick a different one and come over here. And I'm just increasing the size of these brushes. Oh, don't forget to click the mask. And that looks pretty good there, but I do want to fill in a little bit of the area here, so I'm gonna pick maybe one more. I don't like that one. Let's try a different one. And that actually looks pretty good. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to do one more kind of behind there since we had some problems with the clouds. And see, now we got a really interesting sky, and it's not as plain and boring as before. Let's just quickly see what a difference that makes. Alright, so next we're going to move on and work on some of our color that we have in here in this image. Probably the first thing that I'm going to touch on is we're going to basically bump up the intensity of Ariel's hair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer by clicking here in my adjustment layer panel. And since the color of her hair is red, I'm going to come in here to our red channels, and I'm just going to click and drag up to increase the reds. And then I'm going to invert the mask by hitting Control I, and I'm going to come in here with my brush. I'm going to switch it back to a regular brush instead of a cloud first, and then we're just going to zoom in here, and we're just going to paint our mask so that this is only showing up where Ariel's hair is. So I'm just going to paint in real quick. Like I say, guys, when you're doing this for kind of an image that you're going to be putting out there for the world, you might want to take a little bit more time than I am just to make sure the edges are perfect. But for the purpose of this tutorial and time, I'm just kind of roughly painting in here. Again, if you make a mistake, you can just invert to black and paint it away. And get this piece down here. And get this area right in here. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Now, the next part I want to work on is actually going to be our fin down here. So we're going to create a new curves adjustment layer. And this time we're going to go into the green channel. And I'm just going to click again and kind of drag that up to increase the greens in the fin. And then invert the mask. And we're going to paint that in. I'm only going to paint here where it looks like some of the color would have been shining through. Oops. And if you make a mistake, you can always just hit Control-Alt-Z and that'll undo it. Now it looks like maybe I got a little bit too much intensity there, so I'm actually just going to come up here to the opacity and pull down the opacity on this layer so it's not quite as intense. And something like that looks pretty good. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is I want to add some saturation to her hair as well as the seashells and this fin. So I'm going to grab a hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm just going to drag up our saturation here, probably about 15 points or so. And then I'm going to invert the mask, and again I'm going to paint in just where the fin, the seashells, and her hair is. And you see it gives the color now just kind of a nice pop. It really stands out well with the reds and the greens. Alright, so Ariel's looking pretty good, but now we've got some other stuff we need to take a closer look at. So let's create another curves adjustment layer, and we're going to do the same thing for these roofs in the background. You can see they're kind of a red color, so we're going to click again on our red channel, and we're just going to pull up the midpoint a little bit, invert our mask, and paint in on the roof here. See, we're getting some nice intensity to the reds there. And before and after. See, that really helps those roofs to pop out a little bit more. Now the next thing I want to take a look at is actually going to be the green of the trees here. Now this is a little bit more difficult to make a selection for. So what we can do is we can create a selection using the same method we did earlier. So I'll click on my background layer. I'll go up to select color range, and this time I'll just click, and this is where sometimes you might want to choose selection preview to none so you can see what you're clicking on. I'm just going to click here in the tree area, and then I'll pull back my grayscale, and you see you get a pretty good selection of the palm trees. So I'm just going to hit OK, and now we've got our selection, and I'm going to create a new curves adjustment layer, drag it up to the top. And I'm going to go into our green, and I'm just going to pull that up ever so slightly. You see we get a little bit more pop in the greens in the trees. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is we've still got some color that can be worked on down here with the starfish and the algae. So I'm going to zoom in, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create a curves adjustment layer for the starfish. They're red, so we're going to pull up our red channel, invert the mask, and paint that in. So we got two of them. That looks pretty good. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll create another curve adjustment layer, click on the green channel, pull that up, and just kind of paint in where you see a little bit of the green in the algae. Alright, that's probably a little too much again, so on this one I'm just going to bring back the opacity a little bit. And something right about there looks pretty good. Alright, so let's zoom out here, take a closer look at the full image. And one of the things that's now standing out to me, now that we've got most of our color looking pretty good, is the contrast on this lower portion is quite flat, and that's due to the fact that originally we had sort of that overcast sky that really wasn't allowing a lot of sunlight through. So let's create a selection for the lower half of our image, and we can easily do that by control clicking on our earlier mask that was for the sky and then choosing select inverse, and that will give us the selection just for the lower portion of the image. And then we're going to add some contrast by again using a curves adjustment layer. So come up here, click curves adjustment, and basically we're going to create kind of an S curve on this line that you see here under the RGB channels. And what that does is it adds contrast to your image. So I'm going to click down here in the shadow region. Well, if it'll let me. Click down here in the shadow region, drag that down, and then pull up here in the highlights and drag that up. And you'll see instantly we've got quite a bit of contrast that's adding into the image. It doesn't look nearly as flat anymore. So I'm just going to tweak that a little bit. And you can see the curve is quite subtle, but it makes a huge impact. Alright, that looks pretty good. Alright, so another thing to me is this image overall just looks a little dark. So I'm just going to bring up the brightness overall just a little bit. And I'm going to click on Curves Adjustment Layer once again. I'm just going to click on the midpoint here, and I'm just going to bring that up ever so slightly. And you'll see that we get quite a bit of brightness added in throughout the entire image. It really just helps bring up the lighting in the image and make you feel like it's actually a bright blue sky sunny day, whereas before it's kind of dim, and maybe you can tell a little bit more that this was taken on a overcast day. So now that's starting to look a bit better as far as the brightness. But another thing I noticed here when I did that is we've got these nice blue colors here on the wood ship, but I'd like to maybe saturate those a little more. So click on the hue saturation adjustment layer, and instead of doing a master saturation, we're just going to increase the blues saturation. So come down here and choose your blue channel, and then we're just going to bump up the saturation just for the blues, and you'll see it's affecting our sky and it's also affecting the ship color there. But we're going to invert our mask, Control I, and then we're going to come and we're just going to paint white only in this area for the ship, so that our hue saturation for the blue is only affecting this small area right here. And again, you might want to be a little more careful with your masking, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to do this very quickly. You can see it's kind of subtle, but I think it helps make the blues stand out just a little better. I'm going to give that a few more points. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Finally, I think overall we've got a pretty good look to the image, but now I feel like maybe the sky is a little flat. So I'm going to come back in and create another curves adjustment layer where we'll select our sky. We'll create another S curve, but this time specifically just for the sky. And that's going to add a little bit more contrast just in the sky area. You can see that looks quite a bit nicer, I think, than the previous sky, which looked a little flat. Okay, so now I'm going to come and I'm actually going to just bump up the saturation overall for the entire image. I really like my colors to pop, so I tend to add quite a bit of saturation, and you want to be careful not to overdo it. So if you get it to a point where you think it's maybe a little bit too much, just dial it back just a little bit, and that's usually your safe area for saturation. I'm going to go with 12 points. I think that looks pretty good. It adds a nice saturation to the image overall. And then just for some final touches, I'm actually going to do another curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to pull the midpoint down, but I'm only going to paint it here in the castle area, and it'll just kind of make the castle have a little bit more contrast in respect to the rest of the image. Toggle off and on. You can see it kind of makes it a little bit darker, but I think it makes it just have a little bit more contrast when compared to the brightness of the rest of the image. Alright, so the final thing we want to do is we want to Control Alt Shift and E, which is going to make a stamp visible layer, and we want to sharpen our entire image. So we're going to go up here to Filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen, and I usually like to keep it pretty high. 195%, 1.7 pixels is pretty good for this type of image. If you're using a lower resolution image, you may not want to use as high of a percentage or high of a radius. But if I click here on the preview, you can see that's the before, that's after. It really makes the edges and the details pop. So I'm going to hit OK on that. And then I actually take it one step further to kind of fine tune my sharpening. So what I do is I come in here to the channels and I control click on RGB. That's going to basically make a selection of the entire image. And then I come back to my layer that I've sharpened and I add a layer mask. And then if you take a look, you can see now you've basically got a complex layer mask for the entire image. And I'm going to come up here to Filter, Stylize, Bind Edges. I'm going to invert that, and then I'm going to pull up my levels by pressing Control L, and I'm just going to dial in the blacks and whites, so it's mostly all black and white and there's not really any grays in the middle there. That looks pretty good. And then finally I'm going to go Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I usually do about 3 pixels. And that just about does it, guys. As you can see here, let me group all of this so you can see the before and after. You can just shift click all the layers and press Control G to put them in a group. That's our before, and then with just basically a bunch of curve adjustment layers and hue saturation and a few other things. We've basically taken it from this to that. Alright everyone, that'll do it for part 1 of our episode. Be sure to check out part 2 where Jordan's going to take us through some advanced tips and techniques in Photoshop.